Most history books only talk about royal concubines, women behind palace walls. But what they don't tell you is the existence of their male counterparts. For over 2,000 years, across dynasties from Han to Ming, a secret trade flourished in plain sight. The buying and selling of the most beautiful, talented young boys in China. These boys weren't servants. They weren't entertainers. They were possessions, highly valued status symbols collected by emperors, nobles, wealthy merchants, and even certain monks. Trained not just in music, poetry, and philosophy, but in the subtle art of pleasing powerful men, they became living trophies, admired, owned, and controlled. Families, desperate to survive famine or debt, sold their sons. Talent scouts, known politely as beauty brokers, roamed from village to village, searching for the perfect combination of youth, intelligence, and physical beauty. Some boys were as young as 8 years old when they were taken away from their homes, transformed into luxuries for the elite. In public, society praised morality, virtue, and family values. But behind closed doors, a completely different reality thrived. Private contracts were drawn. Matchmakers specialized in this hidden trade. Entire cities, like Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and the bustling port towns of Canton, became hubs for this dark economy of human beauty. Unlike female concubines who could eventually marry or bear children, these boys had no future outside this world. Their value had an expiration date. By their mid-20s, they were often discarded, replaced by newer faces. Despite their prestigious education and refined skills, their existence was ultimately reduced to one purpose: serving the desires of the rich and powerful. What's even more shocking is how normalized this became. Confucian scholars preached virtue while privately maintaining their own collections. Even some monasteries, public symbols of purity, were quietly involved. The hypocrisy was staggering, but everyone pretended it was normal. For centuries, this dark tradition stayed buried beneath the golden image of Imperial China. A hidden world where dignity, consent, and freedom were meaningless, compared to wealth, power, and the obsession with youth and beauty. A life built on a ticking clock. A countdown to inevitable abandonment. This brutal system created an endless cycle of fear, desperation, and quiet suffering, an invisible scar that shaped their entire existence. Even though female concubines endured cruelty, very few experienced the same psychological transformation as these boys, from innocent children into highly trained, highly controlled possessions. How did this nightmare begin? It often started the same way. A famine, a flood, a financial collapse. When survival was on the line, desperate parents were faced with an impossible choice: watch their children starve or sell them to wealthy households. And in this twisted economy, boys were often more valuable than girls. Their price was higher, not for labor, but for something far more disturbing. Professional talent scouts, known as beauty brokers, traveled deep into famine-stricken villages, searching for the perfect specimens. Their criteria were mercilessly specific: pale, flawless skin, delicate facial features, bright, expressive eyes, graceful, almost dancer-like movement, sharp intelligence, the ability to discuss poetry, politics, and philosophy as easily as playing a musical instrument. These boys were examined like livestock. Teeth were checked for health, fingers inspected for musical potential, their voices tested for clarity and tone. Were they suitable for singing, reciting poetry, or pleasing conversation? But perhaps most chilling, scouts obsessively measured bone structure, convinced they could predict how beautiful a child would become as a teenager. Pass, and you were gone. Fail, and your family remained in ruin. A Ming Dynasty writer, Zhang Dai, secretly documented these transactions in his memoirs. He described how agents arrived with silver coins and contracts written in complex legal language that illiterate farmers could never hope to understand. Parents signed away their sons, often never seeing them again. These contracts typically lasted 10 to 15 years. But in truth, few boys survived that long. Once purchased, the transformation was swift and ruthless. Their heads were shaved, their birth names erased. They were given new names, poetic, flowery, names like Jade Whisper or Autumn Moon. From that moment forward, they weren't people, they were property. Disobedience? Met with beatings, starvation, or worse. Any resistance was crushed quickly and brutally. But physical control was only step one. What came next was psychological warfare. Morning to night, memorizing thousands of lines of classical poetry, endless hours mastering calligraphy, music, dance, and theater, learning to play ancient instruments like the guqin and pipa until their fingers bled, training in massage, herbal medicine, and even basic finance to make themselves more useful to future owners. But the most insidious part? Emotional conditioning. Trainers deliberately destroyed any sense of personal worth. They were told over and over, your only value is in how well you serve. Your thoughts, your dreams, your desires mean nothing. Homesickness, rebellion, or even hesitation were punished immediately. The goal wasn't just obedience, it was complete emotional submission. Life inside wasn't just a battle for survival against cruel masters. It was a constant power game against the wives and female concubines. Sometimes unlikely alliances formed. They whispered secrets, offered emotional support, and shared scraps of resources. But more often, they were bitter rivals. Female concubines often resented the boys, jealous of the education, attention, and private affection lavished on them. Every smile from the master, every glance, was fuel for envy and hostility. Medical care barely existed. Sickness meant one thing: useless. And in a world where your body was your value, useless meant disposable. Traditional medicine could do little. Minor injuries from beatings or accidents were hidden because damaged property was bad business. Yet in the middle of this nightmare, rare moments of real human connection existed. Bonds forged in desperation. Quiet pacts of survival. They invented secret codes, shared food, and sometimes even plotted escapes, though almost none succeeded. At the Imperial level, this system reached terrifying heights. Power could lift a boy to unimaginable privilege, or crush him in a blink. The most infamous example? Dong Xian, the boy who captured the heart of Emperor Ai of the Han dynasty. Dong entered court at 17 as a minor official. His beauty was legendary, described in royal records as skin like polished jade and eyes like shining stars. Within weeks, he rose from obscurity to become the emperor's closest companion. Emperor Ai was obsessed. Titles, land, wealth beyond imagination, all poured at Dong's feet. The most famous moment? One afternoon, Emperor Ai woke to find Dong asleep on his sleeve. Rather than disturb him, the emperor took scissors and cut his own sleeve, letting Dong sleep undisturbed. That simple act became legend. Cutting the sleeve is still a symbol of male love in Chinese literature to this day. Dong's influence skyrocketed. His family gained top government positions. Ministers and nobles bowed to him, knowing he spoke directly into the emperor's ear. But then, the emperor died suddenly at just 26. Dong's world collapsed overnight. The new regime stripped him of everything. Betrayed, humiliated, facing execution, Dong took his own life. His story became a brutal warning for every boy who rose too high. Centuries later, the Ming dynasty's Emperor Zhengde pushed this obsession further. Instead of a single companion, he built an entire secret palace, the Garden of Plum Blossoms, filled with dozens of hand-picked boys from across the empire. Not just for companionship, but for hunting trips, private banquets, and anything his desires imagined. The emperor's favorite boys weren't just pretty faces. They became political kingmakers, whispering into the emperor's ear, steering everything from military appointments to tax policies, even foreign diplomacy. The emperor trusted them more than his own advisors, and the empire paid the price. Records show entire wars were launched simply because a favored boy convinced the emperor that a military campaign sounded fun. Not strategic, not necessary, just entertaining. It wasn't just dangerous, it was catastrophic. By the Qing dynasty, imperial officials tried to stamp it out, publicly declaring moral codes, banning male concubines, and threatening harsh punishments. But behind closed doors, even the emperors quietly maintained secret male companions. The famous Kangxi emperor had several, though court records scrubbed the details clean, carefully avoiding anything explicit, but everyone knew. For those inside the Forbidden City, the danger wasn't just heartbreak. It was poison. It was assassination. It was false accusations of treason. The higher a boy's status rose, the more enemies he made. Jealous ministers, rival factions, even former favorites eager to reclaim power. Unlike wealthy merchants, who might grow genuinely attached to their companions, the emperors treated them as disposable luxury. A newer, prettier face, the old one vanished. And with the empire's limitless resources, a steady flow of beautiful boys arrived. Gifts from provincial governors desperate to win favor. These favorites influenced everything: tax collection, military strategies, diplomatic alliances. Entire provinces burned because of whispered desires inside palace walls. The collapse of the Tang dynasty? Historians partly blame Emperor Xuanzang's obsession with his inner circle of favored boys and women. So consumed by indulgence, he stopped ruling effectively. Few survived old age. Most met horrific ends, poisoned by rivals, executed on false charges of treason, driven to suicide by constant psychological warfare. Palace records detail it all. Bodies buried in unmarked graves outside the Forbidden City. Names erased from history as if they never existed. Publicly, Chinese society preached Confucian values: honor, virtue, strict gender roles. Privately, the same scholars who wrote essays on morality kept secret male concubines in their homes without a shred of shame. A perfect example of the brutal gap between public virtue and private desire. In northern China, especially around Beijing, this practice was openly accepted among the wealthy elite. But down south, in provinces like Guangdong and Fujian, it became a shadow game. Publicly condemned, privately thriving. Port cities like Guangzhou became underground hubs for trading these boys. Merchants preached family values by day and shopped for beauty by night. Poetry made it worse. Legendary poets like Li Bai and Du Fu wrote cryptic verses romanticizing the beauty and companionship of young men. The public adored these works, oblivious or willfully blind to what they really meant. At the core, brutal economics. Poor families sold their sons to save daughters, buying respectable marriages for one child by sacrificing another. Misery was turned into currency. Even temples weren't innocent. Buddhist and Taoist monasteries, supposedly preaching detachment from worldly desires, secretly brokered deals. Some monks kept favorites themselves, masking exploitation as spiritual mentorship. The class divide was ruthless. The poor sold their children, the rich bought them, and no rich family would ever offer their own sons to the same fate. Confucian scholars twisted logic to justify it, claiming male concubines provided intellectual stimulation wives couldn't. Some even argued it was a virtue. No accidental pregnancies, no messy inheritance disputes. The government? Pure hypocrisy. Laws technically banned parts of this system, but enforcement was selective and often just a weapon to crush political enemies. For male concubines, aging wasn't just cruel, it was a death sentence in slow motion. From the day they entered, the countdown began. By their early 20s, most showed signs of accelerated aging, caused by stress, starvation, and the brutal pressure to remain perfect. Daily beauty routines became acts of self-destruction. Chemical treatments, skin bleaching, and agonizing procedures that left permanent damage. Drugs became the only escape. Opium flowed freely in rich households. Most boys were addicts within months. It numbed the terror, but locked them deeper into dependence and control. Suicide rates were horrifying. Historical records mention young men leaping from rooftops, drowning in palace ponds, hanging themselves behind locked doors. Of course, these deaths were reported as accidents or illness. No one wanted scandal. No one wanted truth. Physical abuse was normalized. A kind master might only beat his boy occasionally. Others did it daily for mistakes, for disobedience, or for sport. Their isolation was absolute. Screams went unheard. Pleas were ignored. Servants looked away, too terrified to intervene. And medicine? Useless. Traditional treatments couldn't fix broken bones or shattered minds. This wasn't just servitude. It was a slow, elegant, beautifully decorated execution. Today, modern China has erased this history, scrubbed from textbooks, vanished from museums. Researchers daring to dig into it hit walls, archives destroyed, files missing, that silence enforced. Why? Because it cracks the flawless narrative of moral superiority, of tradition, of virtue. But the truth refuses to stay buried. These stories echo a reality we still live in. Look around: child trafficking, forced labor, human exploitation, hidden behind paperwork, hidden behind culture, hidden behind laws. Those boys, their names lost, were not objects. They were people. They deserved to be remembered, not as curiosities, not as cautionary tales, but as human beings who were broken, discarded, and forgotten by a system that fed on suffering. Progress isn't automatic. Civilization isn't guaranteed. When people turn their backs, society decays into cruelty. And their lesson, their scream through history, is this: human dignity is never negotiable, not ever. erase the past and risk repeating it. Remember them.